It's very little GMOs. Now, corn syrup is a concern on its own, whether or not it's genetically engineered. A lot of people think it may be related to, obesity and diabetes. The other thing is there's a myth that because there's no DNA or protein left in the corn syrup, that it doesn't matter if it's genetically engineered. Here's where science wins over, and that is that the process of genetic engineering, whether you're inserting something, beneficent like vitamin A, or whether you're inserting a pesticide, it doesn't matter what you insert. The process itself creates massive collateral damage in the DNA that could increase levels of toxins, allergens, carcinogens, anti-nutrients, and some of these changes, which are not properly evaluated before crops get on the market, could in fact survive the processing and end up in corn syrup or corn oil or soybean oil, etc., like that. And so people that say, well, there's no problem because there's no detectable DNA and there's no detectable proteins, they're just not aware of the scientific concerns. Now, as an example, there was a study that was done on Monsanto's Mon 810 corn, which produces this insecticide called Bt toxin. And they found that in normal corn, the sister corn that's non-GMO, there was a gene there which was silent, and it was turned on accidentally in the GM corn, and it produces a known allergen. And so the GM corn has an allergen in it that's not in the non-GM corn. It was not detected as part of the trivial and superficial review process in Europe or the United States. It was only detected by independent scientists afterwards. In soy, Monsanto discovered that their cooked soy has as much as 7 times the amount of a known allergen, but they conveniently left that fact out of their published peer-reviewed study in 1996, and it was only after it was found in the archives of the journal and made public did we know that there's higher levels of an allergen in GM soy. But these are part of the collateral damage, the unpredictable side effects, which makes genetic engineering completely inappropriate as a technology for human food supply or animal food supply at this point.
Well, that's right, and as you've been detailing over the years, and that you obviously bring up in your book, Seeds of Deception, and also your new one that is out as well, Genetic Roulette. This we can see these because a lot of the animal studies that have been made on mice and then other animals as well is that they actually avoid eating any of the GMO foods that are given to them, and then of course we have the force feeding taking place as well. Horrible animal testing, obviously, but these show us some really interesting things as well, don't they, Jeffrey?
Yes, I mean, I think it's fascinating that, when given a choice, so many different species of animals have avoided GMOs, including cows, pigs, geese, squirrels, elk, deer, raccoons, mice, rats, and buffalo. It's our job to get humans up to the level of animals, I think. In terms of the actual results, I'll be publishing today something on GE salmon, and we can talk about that in a moment, which is a new topic and creating quite an alarm in the U.S. But I published something on Huffington Post last week that showed that when rats were fed genetically modified soybeans, they had changes in their uterus, ovaries, and sexual cycle. And I mentioned that this is, it's not a smoking gun on its own, but it's just another piece of mounting evidence that suggests that genetically modified crops are causing reproductive problems in the human population. And I'll give you a summary of some of those if you'd like. There was a study that I reported on in April that was done at a Russian Academy of Sciences facility in Moscow, where they fed hamsters GM soy for 2 years. And by the 3rd generation, most of the hamsters on the GM soy diet had lost the ability to have babies. And of the offspring that were born, there was a death rate that was 5 times higher than those that were fed non-GM soy. There was also a slower growth rate among those fed GM soy, and many of them by the 3rd generation had a very high incidence of a rare phenomena of hair growing in their mouths. Now, when I heard this five-fold increase in infant mortality, in this case it was 25% compared to 5%, or in another it was 20% compared to 5%, depending on which group you looked at. It reminded me of another study done in Moscow 5 years earlier, where they fed female rats genetically modified soy, and more than half of the offspring died within 3 weeks, compared to a 10% death rate. Again, five-fold increase. And like the hamsters, the offspring of the rats were smaller, in this case quite a bit smaller, and in a subsequent follow-up study, the rat offspring were not able to have babies with the same rate as the non-GM fed. And so again, sterility, offspring, infant mortality, slower growth rate, in this case rats compared to hamsters. Now, we saw the changes in the uterus and ovaries. There's a counterpart. When they fed GM soy to rats in Moscow, this was 5 years ago or so, they found the testicles changed from pink to blue. When they fed to mice in Italy, the testicles were also damaged, including changes to the young sperm cells. And then when they looked at the offspring at the embryo stage of mice that were fed GM soy, the embryo DNA functioned differently. Then the Austrian government did a study on GM corn. This was both Roundup Ready and BT corn. It was a stacked, so it had both the poison producers and the poison drinker genes in there. And they found that the more corn that was fed to the mice, the fewer the babies were born and the smaller the babies were. Again, just dramatic results on the reproductive issues. And we see in livestock, I talked to farmers and veterinarians who see when livestock are switched to non-GM diets, they have less death rate among the offspring, less stillborn rate, higher weight gain, more milk production. In India, an investigative team found that many of the buffalo that were eating genetically modified cottonseed cake had reproductive problems like infertility and premature deliveries and abortions. And it's interesting that it could be the massive collateral damage that occurs as a result of the process of genetic engineering. But in the case of the soybean, there is probably an additional contributor, and that is Roundup herbicide. Soybeans are created to be Roundup ready, meaning they can be sprayed by Monsanto's Roundup herbicide, and the plant absorbs a lot of the Roundup, and it absorbs it and concentrates it in the soybean itself, which we eat. So the residues are much, much higher. Now, Monsanto's been claiming wrongly for years that it's a very safe herbicide, but in fact, it's now been linked to birth defects, abortions, death of placental cells, cancer, and numerous other problems. And so it could easily be an aggravator of these reproductive problems. It might be the sole cause, it might not be, we don't know. We do know that the cottonseed cakes that were eaten by the buffalo in India are not treated necessarily by Roundup. It's because they're not supposed to have Roundup ready cotton, although they do actually have smuggled in, and it is being used there nonetheless. So we don't know the exact cause, because in almost all the cases, when someone discovers a problem, they're attacked, vilified. The person in Moscow 5 years ago was told by her boss, who was receiving pressure from his boss, that she couldn't do any more GMO studies. She never got funding to reproduce the study that she did. No one else has reproduced this simple study that she did, which would cost a few $1,000s. So we have a lot of smoking shotguns here, but not necessarily a single smoking gun, because there's not been sufficient funding to allow for follow-up.
Oh, well, that's a tragedy. But again, as you say, I mean, all these small little aspects of what we do know at this point should be evidence enough, and it's mounting. Every time a new study is being made, it's and we hear the same thing repeated over and over again. Of course, that this is causing cancer, and the rats or the mice won't eat it and things like that. And then obviously we have other things, the effects on human beings, itself. So I've heard you say that we can develop, this is your term, Roundup ready gut bacteria. I mean, that's horrific. Tell us about that, Jeffrey. Well,
this is one of the scariest pieces that I share with people. So if people are freaked out, just It'll just go quickly. The only human feeding study ever published on GMOs showed that the Roundup-ready genes that are inserted into soybeans can actually transfer into the bacteria of living inside of humans, living inside our intestines. The bacteria there actually integrate these genes and continue to produce the Roundup-ready protein. So these people had Roundup-ready gut bacteria, just like Roundup-ready soy was unkillable with Roundup. So these bacteria were unkillable with Roundup. Now, we don't know the medical implications. We know that the protein that is produced that makes a soybean Roundup ready has properties of a known allergen, a dust mite allergen. In fact, that quality alone, according to the WHO, should have disallowed soybeans from being approved. But that was ignored. Now, the corn that is eaten in the United States is genetically engineered either to be Roundup ready or another form of herbicide tolerance, Liberty Link, or it is designed to produce its own toxic insecticide called Bt toxin. If the gene that produces the Bt toxin were to transfer to the gut bacteria, it might theoretically turn it into living pesticide factories, possibly for the long term. Now, if you ask the companies that produce this Bt toxin-laden corn or cotton, is that a problem? They'll tell you, oh no, the toxin is not something that people need to worry about. It only has a negative effect on certain types of insects where it breaks open their stomach and kills them. Now, that's based on three assumptions. One, that mammals have no receptor cells and have no way of interacting with Bt toxin. Two, that the toxin is destroyed in the digestive process. And three, that it has a history of safe use, even in organic agriculture, as a natural Bt spray. Now, in reality, those three assumptions are completely false. When the Bt toxin was fed to mice, it survived digestion and caused tissue damage in the intestines or immune system responses, pretty significant ones. When humans were exposed to Bt toxin, they get reactions. In fact, about 500 people who were sprayed with Bt got allergic or flu-like symptoms, and some had to go to the hospital. Now, in India, where farm workers are picking the Bt cotton, and by the way, the Bt produced in the plants is thousands of times more concentrated than the natural spray version of the same toxin, and it's designed to be even more toxic than the natural version, and it can't be washed off a plant or biodegrade like it does in agriculture. In organic agriculture, it just stays inside every cell of the plant. So when farmers are picking this Bt cotton plants, they're getting rashes all over their bodies, and by the thousands. This was reported in investigative reports and medical investigations and in investigative journalism, and we've seen pictures of rashes all over their bodies, the same allergic and flu-like symptoms as those in the U.S. who are sprayed with Bt are being found in India. Moreover, they allow animals to graze on cotton plants after harvest. And when they graze on natural cotton, there's no problem. When they graze on the Bt cotton, thousands have died. I visited one village where all 13 buffalo died after grazing on Bt cotton plants for a single day. And when animals like mice and rats are fed genetically modified corn that produces this Bt toxin, we see immune system responses in either Monsanto studies or independent, even government-funded studies like one in Italy. So we have plenty of evidence showing that this toxin is, in fact, dangerous, toxic, and allergenic to humans and mammals, and it may be produced continuously inside our intestines if we eat genetically modified corn chips. But no one has looked at this. And so it's just another one of the very important studies that should have been done long before this stuff was approved.
It's absolutely horrible, and the other aspect of this as well is in terms of, we can individually, choose not to eat GMO produce and things like that. But I remember an article a while back now. I'm searching for it. I can't find it at this moment. But basically, the article was talking about that GMO crops now have began to spread out in nature as well, in a rate which is, they can't stop this basically. enough has now been leaked into the natural